I still remember the exact moment when everything changed. The lab was silent, except for the soft hum of the equipment monitoring deep space signals. Then, it happened. A pattern, so deliberate, so structured, appeared on the monitor. Not just noise, but a clear signature, a mathematical sequence far beyond anything nature could produce. For months, we had been scanning that distant star system, over 1,200 light-years away, hoping, but never truly believing. Yet there it was, proof. At first we thought it was an artificial satellite, maybe even a rogue probe, but as we refined the data and the images came into focus, we realized the horrifying truth. It wasn't a satellite, it wasn't a probe, it was something much bigger. Massive structures, eclipsing their own star in rhythmic, controlled patterns. Some shaped like colossal rings, others resembling dark angular panels stretching for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Dyson swarm, or maybe something even more advanced. The room fell into a stunned silence as the scale of it all hit us. We weren't just looking at alien technology, we were witnessing the remnants of a Type 2 civilization, a species that had harnessed the full power of their star, and yet they were gone. But why? What could destroy a civilization capable of such technological mastery? That question haunted me as I prepared for what would be the most secretive and dangerous mission of my life. We had to go there. The decision was made in complete secrecy. Only a handful of us knew the true nature of the mission, and even fewer understood the risks involved. NASA, along with a coalition of international space agencies, fast-tracked the launch of the Hermes 5, the most advanced interstellar exploration vessel ever constructed. I was chosen as the mission's lead exo-archaeologist, not because I was the best, but because I had spent my entire life studying the theoretical constructs of civilizations far more advanced than our own. As I stood on the observation deck, watching Earth shrink into the void, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover something we were never meant to see. We traveled faster than any human crew had ever dared, using experimental Alcubierre drives to bend the fabric of space itself. Time and distance blurred into irrelevance. The journey took just over 7 months from our perspective, but back on Earth, nearly 2 decades would pass before we could send any information home. We knew the risks, we knew the isolation, but nothing could prepare us for what awaited on the other side. The first thing we saw as we dropped out of warp near the star system was darkness. Not the usual void of space, but an absence. As if the light itself was being devoured. Our sensors struggled to make sense of the readings. The star, once vibrant and life-giving, now flickered weakly, partially obscured by titanic structures orbiting it in precise mechanical formations. We initiated a slow approach, moving between massive panels that stretched out for thousands of kilometers. Some were shattered, their fragments drifting lazily as if the whole system had been frozen mid-collapse. Others remained intact, but covered in strange, dark residue, something that, to this day, we've yet to fully analyze. Pressed my hand against the viewport, staring at the megastructures that dwarfed even our most audacious dreams. These weren't simple energy collectors. They were something more, something we didn't have the words for yet. Maybe habitats, maybe weapons, or perhaps monuments, to a civilization that had transcended the need for planets altogether. The ship's AI Lyra ran constant scans, but the data didn't make sense. The radiation levels around the structures were abnormally low, almost as if the system had been sterilized. No signs of life, no signals, just silence. But then, we found something. Hidden behind one of the fractured panels, buried in the shadow of a decaying ring, was what looked like an access port, a gateway leading inside one of the megastructures. My heart pounded as the crew gathered in the docking bay. This was it, the threshold of human exploration. We weren't just visiting another star system. We were about to step inside the ruins of a species that had once wielded the power of suns. As I suited up, I couldn't help but think of the ancient explorers of Earth's past, the ones who ventured into unknown lands, not knowing what awaited them. But unlike them, We weren't just crossing oceans. We were about to cross a boundary that no human had ever dared. The airlock hissed open, and we began our descent into the dark heart of the megastructure. The moment my boots made contact with the surface inside the megastructure, I felt it, an overwhelming sense of insignificance. The docking corridor was a cavernous expanse, wide enough to fit entire skyscrapers with room to spare. The walls were composed of some metallic alloy we couldn't immediately identify, smooth, seamless, and yet ancient beyond comprehension. Our helmet's lights cut through the thick, cold darkness, revealing geometric patterns etched into the walls, spanning hundreds of meters in complex fractal designs. They pulsed faintly under our beams, as if reacting to our presence or warning us. The air was thin but breathable, which was shocking considering the presumed age of the structure. Lyra, our ship's AI, ran continuous environmental scans and confirmed the absence of biological contaminants, but detected trace elements of exotic particles, ones we had only theorized about in particle accelerators back on Earth. As we moved deeper, the silence became oppressive. There were no sounds of machinery, no hum of energy systems, just the faint echo of our own movements, magnified 1,000-fold by the immensity of the structure. It was as if the entire facility had been abandoned in a single, catastrophic moment, and yet it didn't feel dead. It felt dormant. The first chamber we entered was unlike anything I had ever seen, a circular hall, easily 2 kilometers across, with towering monolithic pillars arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. The pillars were covered in glyphs, a language or perhaps a form of computational code. But unlike any known linguistic system, our xenolinguist, Dr. Kwan, was practically shaking with excitement as she scanned the symbols, trying to decipher even the most basic syntactic patterns. But they defied all logic. The structures weren't linear, they were multidimensional, twisting in ways that made our eyes hurt the longer we looked at them. At the center of the hall stood a massive spire reaching up into darkness beyond our light's reach. It was connected to what appeared to be a control interface, a complex array of crystalline structures arranged in a radial pattern around the base of the spire. I ran my gloved fingers over one of the crystals. It was cold to the touch, but beneath the surface, I could sense something, a faint vibration like a heartbeat long forgotten. Lyra issued a cautionary alert through our comms. Unidentified energy signatures detected. But there were no immediate threats, no movement, nothing. Just that faint pulse. We decided to set up a temporary research outpost at the edge of the chamber to begin a more detailed analysis. Drones were dispatched to map the area, but within minutes, we encountered our first real anomaly, one of year. The drones, a model specifically designed for zero-atmosphere exploration, suddenly lost all communication. Its video feed froze on a single frame, a shadow, humanoid in shape, but impossibly tall, standing motionless near the far wall. At first, we thought it was an error, maybe a corrupted signal caused by interference from the megastructure's materials. But then, another drone captured the same image from a different angle, a figure, a shape, something that should not have been there. We froze, all of us staring at the monitors in disbelief. There had been no readings of biological life, no heat signatures, no movement on any of our sensors, and yet, there it was, a shape in the shadows. The team debated furiously. Some wanted to return to the ship immediately to report our findings and regroup. Others, myself included, argued that this was precisely why we had come here. To uncover the truth, I felt torn between fear and curiosity, but ultimately, the mission demanded that we press on. We advanced cautiously towards the sector, where the drones had captured the image, weapons primed but lowered. As we approached, we saw nothing. The figure was gone. But what we did find made my blood run cold. The floor was covered in strange black residue, similar to what we had seen coating some of the exterior panels. But here, it was different. It looked almost organic, like it had once been alive, and then melted into this formless tar-like substance. As we analyzed samples, Lyra issued another alert. Structural instability detected in adjacent sectors. But before we could respond, the faint pulse we had detected earlier intensified. The spire at the center of the hall lit up in a deep crimson glow as ancient mechanisms, dormant for millennia, began to awaken. And in that moment, I realized we had just triggered something that had been waiting. The crimson light from the spire pulsed steadily now, casting long, jagged shadows that danced across the cyclopean walls of the chamber. It was as if the entire megastructure had inhaled after millennia of lifeless silence and was now preparing to exhale. We stood frozen, weapons raised, sensors overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the energy signatures that erupted from the spire's core. Lyra's voice echoed in our helmets, her tone colder than usual. Unprecedented energy surge detected. Advise immediate evacuation. But we couldn't move. None of us could. It wasn't fear. It was something else. A profound, almost gravitational pull toward the spire. As though, now that we had awakened it, it refused to let us go. The crystalline interface we had touched earlier began to rotate, silently and with mechanical precision, aligning itself into new configurations we hadn't seen before. Above us, vast panels along the chamber's ceiling shifted, releasing clouds of dust that had likely not been disturbed in tens of thousands of years. And then, the sound. A deep, resonant hum filled the air. Not mechanical, not digital, but something in between. It vibrated in our bones, bypassing our suit's sound dampeners entirely. The hum grew louder, building into a complex harmonic sequence, as if the machine wasn't just activating, but communicating. Dr. Kwan, still, analyzing the glyphs, suddenly shouted through the comms, "It's a protocol, a sequence, it's responding to us." Before we could ask her what she meant, a section of the central platform began to descend, revealing a spiral staircase made of the same impossible alloy as the rest of the structure. A path leading downwards into the very heart of the megastructure. "Should we go?" one of the engineers asked, his voice shaking. We all knew there was no turning back. Not now. As we descended, the crimson light followed us, illuminating intricate mural-like engravings along the staircase walls. They depicted scenes that sent chills down my spine. Vast fleets of ships, planets encased in mechanical shells, stars harnessed by impossible machinery. And then, unmistakably, an image of collapse. Structures shattering, stars extinguishing, and something indescribable consuming it all. We didn't know if it was history or prophecy. At the base of the staircase, we entered. Another chamber, this one even larger than the first. The architecture shifted here, less industrial, more ceremonial. Towering statues of abstract forms lined the perimeter, their faceless visages staring down at us with cold indifference. And in the center, a massive sphere floated silently above the floor, rotating slowly within a web of metallic filaments and beams of coherent light. It was breathtaking. Lyra identified it almost immediately. Central computational core detected, estimated data storage, multiple yottabytes, likely civilization-level archive, a database, a library of everything this species had ever known. Our systems connected automatically, and data began streaming in torrents too vast for any human mind to process in real time. But among the raw information, Lyra managed to isolate a fragment, a visual log. It played in front of us in holographic form. We watched, spellbound, as an alien world unfolded before our eyes, not barren like this megastructure, but thriving. Towering structures pierced the sky, orbital rings encased their planet like a protective shell, and fleets of vessels the size of continents traversed the stars. They were magnificent. But then, the tone of the log shifted. From the clouds of interstellar space emerged something vast and incomprehensible, a dark, amorphous mass that consumed light itself. We watched as their fleets mobilized in defense and were obliterated within moments. Their great megastructures crumbled, their suns extinguished, and their once mighty civilization was reduced to ruin. The log ended abruptly, and for a moment, all was silent. The same fate that had consumed them had left this monument behind. A graveyard, Suddenly, Lyra issued a new alert. External sensors detect movement. We turned as our helmet's light swept across the chamber's entrance. A shape, tall, humanoid but distorted, as if stretched by the very fabric of space, stood motionless in the doorway. Then another and another, dozens of them emerging from the darkness. No heat signatures, no life signs, just shapes. And then they started moving toward us, slowly, relentlessly. The hum from the spire above intensified into a deafening roar, shaking the very ground beneath our feet. We had awakened something ancient, and now it was awake. They moved without sound, without urgency, their long distorted limbs gliding across the cold alloy floors, closing the distance between us with a terrifying inevitability. We stood paralyzed for a second too long, our minds struggling to reconcile what our eyes were seeing. Figures shaped like us but utterly alien, their surfaces shimmered like liquid metal, constantly shifting, as if their very forms couldn't decide on a single shape. "Back! Fall back!" I shouted through the comms, my voice shaking. But it was already too late. One of the engineers, Patel, froze as a figure reached him. We watched in horror as it extended an arm, or what resembled an arm, and touched his helmet. Instantly, his suit systems overloaded, sparks flying in all directions. His body collapsed to the ground, lifeless without a single wound. The team fired instinctively, plasma rifles and kinetic rounds erupting in a cacophony of desperate violence. But the bullets passed straight through them, leaving no mark, no reaction. They just kept moving, and as if we weren't even there. Lyra screamed in our ears. "Unknown quantum state detected. Non-corporeal entities, advising immediate extraction." We retreated back up the spiral staircase as fast as our suits would allow, our lights darting wildly across the ancient murals, now appearing more like warnings than art. The hum from the core below grew louder, shifting in frequency until it became a deep, resonant pulse that rattled every atom in my body. As we ascended, the walls themselves seemed to change, the fractal engravings now warping, twisting in impossible directions, as if the entire structure was responding to the presence of these things. Finally, we burst back into the initial chamber where the spire still glowed ominously at the center. But now the chamber wasn't empty. They were here too. Hundreds of them, lining the perimeter, perfectly still, watching. No faces, no eyes, just presence. One of them stepped forward, reaching out towards the crystalline interface at the spire's base. As its elongated fingers made contact, the spire's light shifted from crimson to an eerie, pale blue. Instantly, the air changed. The oppressive atmosphere lifted for a moment, replaced by something else, a presence, not hostile, not benign, just ancient. In that moment, a voice, or what could only be described as one, filled the chamber, not through sound, but through our very consciousness, a multi-layered resonance that bypassed our ears and filled our minds with concepts, emotions, and imagery that no language could fully express. But we understood the essence of it, a warning, a memory, a revelation. They were not the builders, they were the remnants, echoes of the civilization that had built these megastructures, or perhaps guardians left behind in its absence. And they were trapped here, bound to the very systems they had created. The voice communicated something else, a wordless impression of the threat that had consumed their creators, a force that defied the laws of physics, of reason, a predatory entity that fed not on matter but on energy, intelligence, and the very essence of civilizations. The dark mass we had seen in the holographic log wasn't just a weapon. It was alive, and it was still out there. Suddenly, the entire chamber began to quake violently. Chunks of the ancient alloy rained down from the ceiling as the spire's energy spiked uncontrollably. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos. "Structural. Collapse imminent. Evacuate immediately." We sprinted toward the exit, the figures watching silently as we passed, making no move to stop us, as if they understood our terror or pitied it. As we neared the docking corridor, I looked back one last time. The figures, had returned to their motionless vigil. The spire's light was dimming, and then the floor beneath them fractured, the entire chamber collapsing inward with a deafening roar. We barely made it back to the Hermes 5, slamming the airlock closed as debris and energy discharges filled the void outside. From the bridge, we watched as the megastructure, or at least that part of it, imploded, sending shockwaves through the surrounding space. But even as it crumbled, our sensors detected something else. A signal. Weak, but deliberate, encoded in the same mathematical language that had first drawn us here. Lyra began decoding it, and as the translation appeared on the monitor, my blood ran cold. It was a set of coordinates, not here, but further, deeper into the system, where the core of the megastructures, and perhaps the truth about what had really happened to this civilization, still waited. We weren't done, not even close. The coordinates were burned into my mind. As we set a course deeper into the system, I couldn't shake the lingering sensation that we had just crossed a threshold, one we could never return from. The Hermes 5 glided silently through the fractured remains of the megastructures, weaving between shattered panels and broken rings that floated like the skeletons of ancient gods. The closer we got to the coordinates, the darker everything became. Not the absence of light, but something else, an oppressive void that seemed to swallow even the thoughts in my mind. Lyra's voice, usually clinical and precise, now carried an almost human hesitation. Approaching anomaly. Gravitational readings are inconsistent. We all stared at the main screen as it displayed the source of the anomaly, a vast, churning vortex at the system's core. Not a black hole, not even a collapsed star, but something artificial, an enormous sphere kilometers in diameter, partially encased in jagged remnants of machinery. It rotated slowly, emitting pulses of low-frequency radiation that resonated through our ship's hull. The sphere was surrounded by debris, not just metal and rock, but remnants of what looked like ships. Dozens, maybe hundreds of them, twisted. Beyond recognition, their forms mangled as if by some incomprehensible force. As we maneuvered closer, we noticed a breach in the sphere's surface, a gaping maw leading directly inside. Felt a knot form in my stomach. We should have turned back, but we didn't. The Hermes 5's automated docking systems aligned us with the breach, and as we crossed the threshold, all external sensors failed simultaneously. No visuals, no comms, just silence. Our suits switched to internal oxygen, and we prepared to disembark. The docking hatch opened, revealing an interior space that defied logic. The laws of physics no longer applied here. Surfaces curved impossibly, angles folded into themselves, and structures twisted in ways that made our eyes water and our stomachs churn. It was as if we had entered a place designed by something that only superficially understood our reality. Our boots touched down on what I could only describe as a metallic surface, though it pulsed beneath our feet, as if alive. The interior was lit by a faint, bioluminescent glow that emanated from veins running along the walls, veins that occasionally throbbed with sickly green light. We moved cautiously, weapons raised, though deep down we all knew they'd be useless here. Further in we found them, bodies, dozens of them. Not human, not even the same species, different designs, different forms, all scattered around in various states of decay. Some had clearly died in battle, their armor and exosuits shattered. Others looked as if they had simply stopped functioning, frozen mid-movement. The horror of it hit us all at once. This wasn't just a ruin, this was a graveyard, and not just for one species, for many. Whatever this place was, it had been visited by others before us, all of them, drawn here by the same signal, the same promise of knowledge or power, and all of them destroyed. Dr. Kwan knelt beside one of the alien corpses, analyzing its remains with quiet reverence. "Different evolutionary paths," she whispered. "Different worlds, all ending here." Before we could process that, Lyra's voice cut in again, but distorted now, glitching. "Warning. System interference. Presence detected." Presence? We scanned the immediate area but saw nothing. No movement, no heat. Just the faint sound of breathing. But it wasn't ours. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all exhaled in perfect unison, as if the entire structure was inhaling and exhaling around us. And then, a new sound. A voice. Not like before, not in our minds, but external, raw, and agonizingly familiar. It spoke in our own language. Why? Have you come? We all turned toward the source, our helmet lights converging on a figure emerging from the dark. It was humanoid, wearing a suit almost identical to ours. The visor was cracked, the suit torn and ancient, yet the insignia on the chest plate was unmistakable, the old emblem of the United Earth Space Command, decommissioned nearly a century ago. Impossible. I stepped forward, my voice barely a whisper. Who are you? The figure tilted its head slightly as if studying me. Then it spoke again, its voice layered with static and something else. Something deeper. You must not awaken it. Before we could ask anything more, the figure convulsed violently, collapsing into a heap of brittle, decayed metal and bone. Silence returned, but this time, man, it was different. The sphere had felt our presence, and now it was stirring. Lyra's final warning blared in our helmets. Critical systems compromised. Gravitational flux increasing. Evacuate immediately. But none of us moved. We couldn't, because through the breach ahead, a massive structure began to emerge from the shadows, something so vast and alien that my mind struggled to comprehend it. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't a creature. It was both. And it was waking up. The thing that emerged from the shadows defied every classification. It was a fusion of technology and biology, a sprawling lattice of tendrils and mechanical limbs that stretched into the infinite darkness of the sphere's interior. Parts of it pulsed with an organic rhythm, while others shifted with the precise movements of machinery. No schematic or model prepared us for this. It wasn't just waking up. It was aware. The structure turned slowly, vast sections rotating like the gears of an ancient clock, revealing what I can only describe as an eye, a massive, multifaceted lens embedded within the center of the construct. It focused on us with chilling precision, as if it had been designed solely to observe intruders. Lyra's voice cut through the rising static, energy levels spiking, system activation underway. Before we could retreat, the gravitational field shifted violently. The floor beneath us tilted at an impossible angle, hurling one of the engineers, Vargas, into the air. He screamed as his body was crushed against a spire of jagged metal, his suit rupturing instantly. Blood misted in 0G before crystallizing. "Move," I shouted, leading what was left of the team towards a nearby alcove, seeking cover as chunks of the interior ripped free, drawn toward the expanding core of the entity. But it wasn't trying to kill us. No, it was trying to assimilate us. From the wall's metallic filaments lashed out like tendrils, seeking purchase, probing, scanning. One grazed the arm of Dr. Kwan's suit. Her scream echoed through the comms as the filament latched on and began pulling her in. I lunged forward, firing my plasma cutter, severing the filament just in time. But the damage was done. Her suit's integrity was compromised, and she was barely conscious. We dragged her away deeper into the labyrinthine interior, guided only by the faint pings of our suit's navigation beacons, which struggled to maintain coherence against the growing electromagnetic interference. And then we saw it. The true heart of the megastructure. A vast spherical core suspended in the center of the sphere's cavity, encased in layers upon layers of interlocking rings that spun independently, generating energy fields we couldn't even begin to understand. Streams of raw data cascaded across the surface of the core in luminous rivers of alien code, like neurons firing within the brain of some incomprehensible god. And then, another voice. Not like before, it's not human. This was cold, analytical, yet ancient and filled with something eerily close to resentment. Assimilation incomplete. New biological signatures detected, proceeding with integration. We realized, with dawning horror, that the entity wasn't just a machine left behind. It was the civilization, The echoes we had seen before, the figures, the guardians, even the shadows, they weren't separate from this thing. They were part of it. It had absorbed them. Every species that had come here, every explorer who sought to uncover its secrets, had been integrated into this vast, monstrous collective. It didn't kill civilizations. It consumed them. Lyra's voice, barely intelligible through the mounting interference, issued a final directive. All crew must evacuate or risk assimilation. But there was nowhere to run. The tendrils closed in from every direction, the environment twisting itself into new configurations designed not for exploration, but for containment. Desperation set in. One of the remaining engineers, Silver, screamed, tearing off his helmet in a futile act of defiance before being enveloped by the tendrils. His body instantly absorbed into the machine's shifting mass. The rest of us fired blindly, but it was like trying to fight the walls of a living world. I looked at Dr. Kwan, barely conscious, and then at the core, pulsing faster and faster, as if feeding off our presence. We had to make a choice, stay and be consumed or risk everything. Lyra provided one last, improbable option, a manual detonation of the Hermes Phi's remaining fuel cells, strong enough to rupture the sphere's inner layers and give us a chance to escape through the breach. But it would mean leaving behind everything, the data, the research, all of it. And there was no guarantee it would even work. As the core's mechanical limbs reached out to claim us, I made the call. Lyra, prepare the detonation. The AI's response was simple, acknowledged. And as the countdown began, I could only hope that we hadn't just condemned ourselves and humanity to become part of this ancient, insatiable machine. The timer started. 10 minutes. That's all we had. Lyra's voice, now fragmented and cold, echoed through our suits. Manual detonation initiated. Evacuation recommended. But evacuation to where? The Hermes Defies was docked outside the sphere, tethered by a fragile umbilical connection that was already being torn apart by the violent gravitational distortions pulsing from the core. The walls around us continued to shift, reconfiguring into shapes that defied logic. Geometric prisms folding into spirals, corridors collapsing into pits of metallic teeth, entire structures coiling like the appendages of a titanic mechanical organism. The machine, or whatever it truly was, had realized our intent. It wasn't going to let us leave. Go, move, I yelled, dragging Dr. Kwan to her feet as another tendril lashed out, narrowly missing us and embedding itself into the wall, melting it into an oozing black sludge. We sprinted through the warping corridors, the distant, rhythmic pulse of the core growing louder with every step. 7 minutes. The path back was nearly unrecognizable. What had once been a corridor was now a winding helix, forcing us to climb and crawl, our suits scraping against the jagged surfaces that oozed with that same bioluminescent fluid. Behind us, the machine's tendrils kept coming, moving faster, now more aggressive. We lost Chen in the ascent. A filament snared his leg, dragging him backward into the dark. His screams were cut short by a wet mechanical grinding sound that I will never forget. There was no time to mourn. 5 minutes. We reached the outer passage leading toward the breach where the Hermes Phi was docked, but the gravitational distortion was far worse here. The very fabric of space twisted in on itself, creating a kaleidoscope of broken dimensions and shattered perspectives. Our ship was barely visible through the warping field, its silhouette bending and fracturing like a reflection on disturbed water. Then the voice returned, that same cold, emotionless tone. Integration inevitable. No, not today. We pushed forward, fighting against the growing force pulling us back toward the core, our boots slipping on the slick metallic surface. I fired my plasma cutter wildly, severing tendrils that lunged toward us from the walls, while the remaining crew followed in terrified silence. 3 minutes. As we approached the breach, Lyra chimed in once more. Core destabilization imminent. Structural failure at 90%. Good. That meant the plan was working, but it also meant we didn't have much time. The last 20 meters felt like a lifetime. Every step was a battle against the artificial gravity, the relentless pull of the core, and the suffocating knowledge that any second could be our last. 2 minutes. I reached the docking umbilical first, locking Dr. Kwan's harness onto the tether and shoving her toward the airlock. The others scrambled after her, barely managing to avoid the snapping mechanical tendrils that burst through the floor behind us. Then, I felt it. Something wrapped around my leg, a thin metallic filament tightening like a serpent, pulling. "Me back, no!" I screamed, twisting and firing my sidearm into the tendril. The shots did nothing. The machine's voice echoed again, closer this time. "Join us!" I grabbed a broken support strut and slammed it against the filament with all my strength. It snapped. I didn't wait. 1 minute. I launched myself through the airlock just as the docking umbilical began to tear free from the sphere's hull. Lyra's final message came through. Detonation. Hence 10-9, the airlock sealed shut. Through the viewport, I saw the sphere's core erupting in a maelstrom of collapsing structures and wild energy discharges. The tendrils writhed violently, as if in agony or rage or both. 3, 2, 1. The explosion was blinding, a silent, white-hot implosion as the Hermes Phi's fuel cells detonated, ripping through the inner layers of the sphere. The shockwave slammed into us, sending the ship tumbling through space like a ragdoll. Systems overloaded, alarms blaring, artificial gravity failing as we were thrown from our stations, and then silence. No more tendrils, no more voice, just the cold, endless void of space, and the fractured remains of the megastructure, now drifting apart like ashes in the wind. We had survived. But as I floated there, staring at the debris field, a terrible realization crept into my mind. The sphere was just one part of the system, one node in something far larger, and we had just announced our presence to whatever else might be out there. The debris from the destroyed sphere floated silently through the void, illuminated only by the weak, dying light of the system star. For a long time, none of us said a word. We were alive, but at what cost? I glanced at the remaining crew. Only 4 of us now. Dr. Kwan sat strapped to her seat, her eyes distant, her breathing shallow. The others were just as hollow, their faces pale from exhaustion and something worse. Realization. We hadn't just escaped, we had triggered something. Lyra's system struggled to reboot. The ship's lights flickered erratically, casting long shadows across the cracked interior. I manually initiated external scans, desperate to confirm that it was truly over. But then, the monitors lit up, not with warnings, with signals. Multiple. Lyra's voice, weak and fragmented, crackled through. The comms' unidentified transmissions, originating from multiple sectors. System-wide activation detected. My stomach dropped. The sphere's destruction hadn't silenced the system, it had awakened it. Across the shattered star system, dormant megastructures, once cold, lifeless husks, began to stir. Slowly at first, then accelerating, their massive forms aligning, adjusting, and activating with an eerie synchronicity. From the remnants of orbital rings to the skeletal frames of Dyson constructs, all of them began emitting the same pulsing signal, the same frequency that had first drawn us here. But now it was no longer a whisper. It was a beacon. I watched in horror as Lyra displayed the system-wide scan. Dozens of spheres, all similar, in design to the one we had just destroyed, hidden within the broken rings and debris fields across the star system. And worse, the signal wasn't just staying here, it was broadcasting outward, beyond the system, beyond the galaxy, everywhere. Dr. Kwan finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. We've told them we're here." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because deep down I knew what this meant. The civilization that had built these megastructures, that had been consumed by whatever dark force had created the spheres. They had left behind more than ruins. They had left behind a trap, and now we had sprung it. Lyra's data streams confirmed the worst. Multiple unknown objects, small, fast-moving, were detaching from the newly activated spheres and dispersing into space. probes, or worse, and scouts. One of the engineers, still clinging to hope, asked, "Can we outrun them?" But Lyra didn't answer. The silence told me everything I needed to know. We were already exposed, already seen, and somewhere out there, something had received the signal. Something that might now be coming for us, for Earth. I sat back in my seat, staring at the vast, awakening graveyard around us, and realized with terrifying clarity, our mission had never been about discovery. It had always been about survival, and we had already lost the first move. The ship drifted silently through the dark, broken system, surrounded by the smoldering remains of ancient megastructures, now fully awake, fully aware. The signals continued to pulse, their strength growing exponentially, reaching across the cold void of space, beyond the bounds of this dead civilization. Heading straight for Earth. We had no idea what they were saying, only that they weren't meant for us, not anymore. Dr. Kwan, her voice hoarse and almost defeated, broke the silence. "We need to send a warning, before it's too late." I nodded, but deep down I wasn't sure anyone would be listening by the time it mattered. Lyra's systems were barely functional, but together we managed to patch a single, compressed transmission through one of the auxiliary relays. An ancient method, slower than anything modern, but maybe, just maybe, it would get through. I recorded the message myself, my voice steady but cold. "This is Commander Elias Wren of the Hermes 5th. We made contact with the remains of a Type 2 civilization, but it was not dead. We triggered a system-wide activation. Multiple megastructures now broadcasting across interstellar space. Unknown entities, possibly hostile, deploying. Earth must prepare. This is not a discovery. It's a warning." I closed the channel. The message, our last desperate act, was now traveling across the abyss, racing home faster than we ever could. But even as we sent it, the realization set in. There was no guarantee that Earth would be able to defend itself. Not against this. Not against something that had already consumed a civilization capable of building structures around their star, that had already obliterated species far older, far stronger than us. The crew sat in silence, staring at the cold void outside the viewport. The fragments of the megastructures still shifting, aligning, growing in complexity, as if building toward something. Something we couldn't yet comprehend. And then a final chilling confirmation from Lyra. Incoming objects, accelerating to near light speed, projected trajectory, Sol system, Earth, they were going home. I leaned back, closing my eyes, feeling the vast merciless machinery of the universe grinding inexorably forward. We had come in search of knowledge, and instead, we had awakened the architects of extinction. As the Hermes 5 drifted silently in the dark, I whispered the last words that I hoped somehow Earth would hear. "We are not alone, and they're coming."